Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas. A border city pressed against the Rio Grande. On one side, Mexico's forgotten streets. On the other, America's shining lights. Here, the line between poverty and prosperity wasn't miles. It was meters, and everyone could see across. Smuggling wasn't crime. It was survival. Trucks rolled across bridges with hidden compartments. Children learned early that dollars had more power than pesos. And in the air, always, the hum of violence waiting to erupt. Miguel Ángel Treviño Morales was born here in 1970. One of 13 children. Too many mouths, not enough bread. His father, a bricklayer, worked under a son that never forgave. His mother tried to keep order in a house that spilled over with chaos. But Miguel didn't fit inside four walls. He wasn't patient. He wasn't obedient. He wanted more. By the time he was 12, he was running errands for smugglers, carrying packages no one talked about, counting money that didn't match his age. The streets of Nuevo Laredo became his classroom, and his teachers were men who settled debts with bullets. Miguel was different. Other boys feared punishment. He didn't. Other boys hesitated at violence. He didn't. When he fought, he didn't stop at victory. He stopped at domination. Fists weren't enough. He wanted silence. By his teens, Miguel was working full-time for traffickers. Not yet a boss, not even a soldier. Just a runner, a messenger, a driver. But he paid attention. He studied routes. He studied faces. He studied fear. Fear was a currency too. And Miguel spent it well. While his brothers sought honest work, Miguel chose shortcuts. The riskier the job, the bigger the payout. Crossing contraband through ranch land. Escorting shipments under the nose of police who were already paid to look away. By his 20s, Miguel wasn't just carrying packages. He was carrying a gun and using it. At first, he killed for others. Settled scores for men with more money, more power. But soon, he realized something. Every time he pulled the trigger, people looked at him differently. Not as a boy, not as a worker, but as a man to be feared. That was his discovery. His weapon wasn't just the rifle in his hands. It was the reputation that followed the echo of its shots. Unlike others, Miguel never looked away from what he had done. He watched. He memorized the final breath, the collapse, the silence. And in that silence, he found something close to satisfaction. For Miguel, murder wasn't hesitation. It was clarity. The border was full of men who wanted quick money. Most ended up dead or forgotten. But Miguel, he was climbing. Every job more dangerous. Every act of violence more ruthless. He wasn't chasing wealth. He wasn't chasing respect. He was chasing control. Because in Nuevo Laredo, control meant survival. Control meant becoming the man others avoided, the man others paid, the man others obeyed. And Miguel decided early, if he couldn't be loved, he would be feared. No fear, no mercy, just silence before the shot and silence after. The late 1990s. Mexico's drug war was mutating. The Gulf Cartel, one of the oldest crime syndicates in the country, needed muscle. Not street kids with pistols, not hired guns who broke at the first sign of pressure. They needed something new, something terrifying. So they unleashed a monster. Los Zetas, hand-picked deserters from Mexico's elite special forces. Men trained in jungle warfare, explosives, interrogation. They weren't gangsters, they were soldiers, reborn as mercenaries, professional killers for hire. Into this machine of discipline stepped Miguel Treviño Morales. But Miguel wasn't a soldier. He had no medals, no uniform, no loyalty oath. What he had was worse. He was a street predator. He thought like a gangster, but killed with the precision of a soldier. The Zetas gave him a number, Z-40. It wasn't just an alias. It was a brand, and Miguel knew how to sell it. While other recruits followed orders, Miguel improvised. He didn't just carry out executions. He redesigned them. Bodies weren't just left behind. They were displayed, burned alive, dissolved in acid, hung from bridges with cardboard signs pinned to their chests. Every killing was theater. Every theater was a message, and every message was the same. Fear is the law. Miguel rose quickly, not because he was smarter, not because he was stronger, but because he understood what terrified people most: unpredictability. A man could be kidnapped for ransom, then killed anyway. A rival could be shot cleanly or skinned alive. There were no rules, only spectacle. Where trained soldiers valued discipline, Miguel valued chaos, and chaos was contagious. Soon others in Los Zetas copied his style. The brutality spread, not as orders, but as inspiration. Treviño turned executions into advertisements. Corpse on a highway, a warning to rivals, mass grave in the desert, proof of power. Dozens of migrants slaughtered in San Fernando, a demonstration of control. To Miguel, the body count wasn't collateral. It was currency. Fear was profit, and he collected. The Gulf cartel had hired soldiers to protect its shipments. But with Treviño, protection evolved into domination. He taxed businesses. He extorted entire neighborhoods. He kidnapped innocents just to remind towns who ruled. And while others kept their distance from the blood, Miguel didn't. He watched. He participated. He enjoyed it. This was his genius and his curse. He didn't just follow the Zeta blueprint, he rewrote it. For Los Zetas, killing wasn't the last step of business. With Miguel Treviño, killing became the business. By the early 2000s, the balance of power shifted. Los Zetas, once the armed wing of the Gulf cartel, broke free. No longer bodyguards, no longer mercenaries. They were independent, unleashed. And at the center of this new beast stood Miguel Treviño Morales, Z-40. He wasn't the founder of Los Zetas, but he became its most feared architect. While others saw business, he saw war. A paramilitary cartel with its own army, its own economy, its own law. Territory wasn't just controlled, it was consumed. Every town, every street, every business. Nothing moved without Z-40's permission. He invented a system called la cuota, the tax. If you made money inside Zeta land, Miguel took a cut. A taco stand, a taxi driver, a mechanic's garage, a nightclub, a bar, a bus line. From the smallest vendor to the wealthiest rancher, no one escaped. And those who refused, they didn't just die. They were turned into messages. Heads displayed in town squares, bodies left in trucks outside police stations, families slaughtered as examples. Every punishment was public, every death designed to echo louder than the last. Treviño understood something simple. Money buys silence. But fear buys obedience, and obedience lasts longer. Under his command, Los Zetas spread across Mexico like a virus. They weren't content with drug smuggling. They diversified. Stolen oil from pipelines, kidnapped migrants held for ransom, human trafficking, weapons running, extortion rackets that bled entire communities dry. Drugs were profit, but terror was the business model. Other cartels sought respect. Los Zetas sought submission, and submission came drenched in blood. Treviño himself reveled in the brutality. He wasn't a distant kingpin counting dollars from a mansion. He was often present at executions, sometimes pulling the trigger, sometimes holding the camera. For him, cruelty was not just enforcement, it was entertainment. Stories spread of him feeding victims to lions, of him ordering people burned alive inside oil drums, of entire busloads of migrants slaughtered and dumped into mass graves. Whether every story was true didn't matter. In Mexico's cartel war, perception was power. And Miguel made sure people believed the worst. By then, fear wasn't just his weapon, it was his brand. And his brand infected everything it touched. Police took bribes because they knew the alternative was death. Mayors obeyed orders because elections meant nothing under the shadow of Z-40. Ordinary citizens kept their heads down, praying not to be noticed. Los Zetas became more than a cartel. They became a government built on terror, a state within a state. And Miguel Treviño Morales wasn't just a boss. He was the minister of fear. the executioner-in-chief. Every peso, every bullet, every scream, all of it flowed through him. Because Treviño wasn't building an organization, he was building an empire of blood. By the mid-2000s, Los Zetas were no longer just another cartel. They were something darker, a paramilitary corporation of violence, and Miguel Treviño Morales, Z-40, was its warlord. Other cartels made billions from cocaine, heroin, and marijuana. Los Zetas went further. They didn't just move drugs. They squeezed money from every corner of Mexico. Migrants heading north through Tamaulipas, they became prey. Hundreds kidnapped, tortured, forced to pay ransom. Those who couldn't, buried in shallow graves, or worse, executed in groups, left as warnings. Pipelines carrying oil for the national company, Pemex. Los Zetas tapped them like veins. They siphoned millions of dollars in black market fuel. Tankers rolled out under Zeta protection, sometimes guarded better than government convoys. Small towns and villages turned into banks of human capital. A farmer paid a tax, a teacher paid a tax, a store owner, a taxi driver, a bus operator. Each one bled for Z-40's empire. And when someone resisted, massacres followed. Entire buses of people shot and dumped in pits, bodies stacked in barns, whole families erased overnight. It wasn't about profit alone. It was about proving control. Because Miguel Treviño understood something cruel. Fear spreads faster than money. You kill one man and a family trembles. You kill 50 and a nation remembers. He didn't just order it from a distance. He was there, watching, studying, sometimes holding the gun himself. Witnesses said he laughed during executions, that he forced victims to fight each other for their lives, that he tested loyalty by making recruits kill strangers with their bare hands. For him, cruelty wasn't business. It was entertainment. Stories grew around him, half legend, half truth. That he fed victims to wild animals, that he roasted men alive inside barrels, that he kept videos of torture as trophies. Whether fact or rumor didn't matter. The legend of Z-40 was stronger than the reality, and legends ruled Mexico's underworld as much as bullets. In cities under Zeta control, the message was simple. Life belonged to Treviño. Your money, your freedom, your body, nothing was yours. Other cartels trafficked in narcotics. Miguel trafficked in terror, and terror was limitless. Terror could be sold, exported, multiplied. Terror could enslave a city without firing a shot. By now, Treviño wasn't just a cartel boss. He was a warlord in the truest sense, commanding armies, ruling territories, bending society to his will. The Mexican state could barely enter his strongholds. Police were corrupted. Soldiers feared ambushes. Even journalists refused to speak his name. Under Z-40, Los Zetas blurred the line between organized crime and organized warfare. They weren't chasing profit margins. They were waging a campaign of terror. And at the center of it all was Miguel Treviño Morales, a man who found joy in cruelty, a man who built power out of corpses. For him, every massacre was proof that he ruled. Proof that no one was safe. Because for Treviño, violence wasn't a tool, it was the empire itself. By the mid-2000s, Los Zetas had crossed a line that few dared to approach. They weren't simply traffickers anymore. They weren't just a cartel. They had become something new, something closer to a private army fueled by blood and fear. At the core of this transformation stood Miguel Treviño Morales, Z-40. For other cartels, drugs were the business. For Los Zetas, drugs were only one stream of income among many. They kidnapped migrants moving north through Tamaulipas, packed them into safe houses like cattle, demanded ransom from their families, and when the money didn't come, executions followed. Dozens at a time. Men, women, even children. Pipelines became targets too. Mexico's national oil company, Pemex, bled millions each year. Zeta engineers tapped lines in the dead of night, filling tankers with stolen fuel. Convoys moved through highways guarded by armed gunmen. The black market boomed, and Treviño's coffers swelled. But extortion was his masterpiece. Every business inside Zeta territory, no matter how small, paid a tax. The corner taco stand, the taxi driver, the nightclub owner, the rancher with a few cattle. If you made money, Z-40 demanded a share. Those who refused didn't just die quietly, they became examples. Heads on stakes in public plazas, bodies dangling from bridges, messages scrawled on cardboard, soaked in blood. It was never just about killing, it was about the show. Because Miguel understood something most criminals ignored. Fear is strongest when it's seen. A corpse left on the roadside could silence an entire town. A busload of massacred migrants could paralyze a nation. He didn't delegate cruelty, he lived it. He often stood among his gunmen as they carried out orders. Sometimes he gave the signal. Sometimes he pulled the trigger himself. Witnesses whispered about his laughter, how he mocked victims as they begged, how he forced men to fight each other to the death with machetes, how he recorded torture sessions, keeping them as trophies. For Treviño, cruelty wasn't just business. It wasn't just enforcement. It was entertainment, a theater of horror where he was both director and spectator. Rumors spread faster than truth, that he fed victims to lions, that he roasted men alive inside oil drums, that he tested loyalty by making recruits kill strangers with their bare hands. Whether every story was real didn't matter. The legend was enough. Under Z-40, Los Zetas blurred into something beyond organized crime. They became warlords of entire regions. The Mexican state avoided their strongholds. Police chiefs either obeyed or disappeared. Soldiers feared ambushes each time they patrolled. Cities fell silent under their shadow. Businesses stayed open not because they thrived, but because they paid tribute. Ordinary families lived day to day, praying not to be noticed. For Miguel Treviño Morales, this was victory, not a mansion, not a fleet of cars, but the silence of millions living under terror. Because his empire wasn't built on cocaine or heroin. It was built on corpses, on spectacle, on the knowledge that no cruelty was too far. And that was his secret. Other traffickers sought wealth. Other bosses wanted respect. But Treviño wanted something else. He wanted to be remembered as the man who made fear into law. 2013. Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas. A city that had long lived under the shadow of Los Zetas. For years, Miguel Treviño Morales had been untouchable. Every attempt to capture him ended in blood. Every rumor of his location evaporated into silence. He was the phantom at the center of Mexico's nightmare. But even phantoms can be cornered. On July 15th, Mexican Marines launched an operation. Intelligence pointed to a dirt road outside Nuevo Laredo. No palaces, no armored convoys, just a truck carrying the most feared man in Mexico. They moved fast. The convoy closed in, and for the first time in his career, Z-40 had no way out, no shootout, no blaze of glory, no army of gunmen materializing to rescue him. Miguel Treviño Morales, the butcher who ordered massacres, the man who fed fear into Mexico's bloodstream, was pulled from his vehicle alive. The same man who once commanded battalions of sicarios stood silent, handcuffed, surrounded, reduced to a prisoner. The capture stunned Mexico. For years, Treviño had been a ghost. Authorities whispered that he had informants everywhere, that he bribed generals, that he moved with impunity. But on that dirt road, stripped of weapons, stripped of power, he looked small. The news traveled quickly. Headlines called it a victory for the state. Television anchors declared that Mexico had cut off the head of the beast. In Washington, officials applauded. But in Mexico's streets, there was no celebration, only fear of what came next. Because Miguel Treviño Morales was not just one man. He was a system, a network of killers, extortionists, corrupt officials, and terrified citizens bound by terror. Removing him didn't erase the system. It destabilized it. Inside Los Zetas, factions erupted. some loyal to Treviño's brothers, others loyal to rival commanders. The chain of command splintered, and with it came new waves of violence. The state had captured a man, but they hadn't captured the monster he created. Miguel himself was paraded before cameras, the butcher of San Fernando, the man linked to countless mass graves, beheadings, and massacres. He didn't shout, he didn't resist, he just stared. For the victims' families, it was a hollow victory. No trial could return their dead. No sentence could erase the memory of the horrors Treviño had orchestrated. And for his enemies, his fall was both relief and opportunity. Cartel rivals circled like vultures. Old alliances collapsed. New wars began. The myth of Z-40 cracked, but it didn't vanish. In prisons and barrios, his name still carried weight. Stories of his brutality still traveled like smoke through Mexico's streets. Because Miguel Treviño Morales had built something larger than himself, an empire of fear, a brand of cruelty, a machine of extortion and death that did not rely on one man to function. And so, when the Marines loaded him into custody, the world witnessed a paradox. The most feared man in Mexico, silent, handcuffed, humiliated. And yet, his shadow stretched on. Nuevo Laredo. On that dirt road, the reign of Z-40 ended. But the terror he unleashed was only beginning its afterlife. Today, Miguel Treviño Morales sits in a cell, alone, under constant watch. No access to phones, no chance to command, no way to touch the world he once ruled. But Los Zetas did not die with him. They did not vanish because one man was captured. An empire built on terror does not collapse when the head is removed. It fractures, it mutates, it survives in shadows and whispers. The organization splintered into factions. Some weaker, struggling to maintain control over territory, some stronger, ruthless enough to challenge old rivals. But all of them carried Z-40's blueprint. Every massacre, every extortion, every ritual of cruelty, every act designed to terrify. It was engraved into the DNA of Los Zetas. Because Miguel Treviño Morales was not simply a boss. He was a template. A model for how violence could be systematized, how fear could become currency, how obedience could be enforced without mercy. Other leaders sell drugs. Other bosses invest in real estate, cars, and luxury. Treviño sold something different. He sold fear. And fear never runs out of buyers. Borders, towns, highways, and pipelines. They all felt his presence long after his arrest. People still remembered the buses of migrants, the oil stolen under cover of night, the towns forced to pay tribute to a shadow that could strike at any moment. Every generation of Zetas has been shaped by him. New recruits trained to replicate his cruelty. Old veterans still speak his name as both warning and inspiration. In some neighborhoods, parents tell their children, "Stay out of his territory, or the consequences will find you." Even years later, that is enough to make hearts pound, legs tremble, voices whisper. The Mexican state captured the man. The legend, however, persists. And in the empty streets of cities once ruled by Los Zetas, silence itself carries his signature. It is the silence of fear, the silence of obedience, the silence of power. Treviño did not need to be present to be influential. His methods, his rules, his reputation, all of it traveled faster than he ever could. He engineered an empire that survived beyond the flesh of its founder. And in that way, he became immortal. Not in stories of glory, not in parades or monuments, but in the quiet terror of those who live under his shadow. The world outside may see a man behind bars, a criminal defeated, a butcher captured, but Los Zetas remember differently. They remember the lessons, the methods, the doctrine of horror. They remember Z-40, and the most chilling truth remains. Fear is renewable. It multiplies, it spreads, it outlives leaders, arrests, and death. Because Miguel Treviño Morales did not just make money. He did not just build a network. He built a system of terror that runs on its own, autonomous, relentless. Some traffickers build empires with money, some with loyalty, Z-40 built his with horror, and horror still pays.